Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
that. How's it feel to be back in Lansing?
Oh, it's good.
How does it feel to have such a great audience?
It's great. I think you, me, and Phil, we had dinner a couple weeks ago, and Phil's like, yeah, one person registered. And I was like, all right, well, that's cool. I mean, sometimes if you get that one person, like, it's worth it. And I can I tell a quick story?
Let's do it.
So the first meetup I created, we had 3 people out to our first meetup. It was me, the co-founder of the group, and one other person. And that person, it turned out about 2 years later, it turned out that they worked at a Fortune 500 company as a developer that happened to use the technology that I was an expert in, Drupal. And so when that company had an issue with their website, they emailed the meetup group and they're like, oh, we need help. And so 2 years later, after that first meetup, I closed my first deal with a Fortune 500 client, and it only took that one person.
That's very cool. What lesson is there for the audience to take away?
It's not about quantity, it's about quality.
I think that's great advice there. So Alex, before you were doing deals with Fortune 500 companies, maybe when you were just a little toddler, what was your home life like when you were just your earliest memories?
I used to play Office in my mom's closet. I put a chair in there, and I stood up on the chair, and there was an upper shelf, and I had like my paper and my pencils. And she made me a computer out of cardboard with these like cardboard floppy disks, and so I played Office.
How old were you?
I was probably like 6, 7.
What got you fascinated in computers back then?
My dad ran a business, and so I would kind of go to the office with him. And this is in the 80s, so he was computerizing. It was an architecture firm. So he was computerizing them, and had like some Sony CPM-based computers with, I think they had floppy drives, or they were the first ones to have like 3.5-inch floppy disks. And so I would just kind of go to the office and see him try to fix these computers, and I got older and started figuring them out myself too.
When you were playing Office, were you pretending to be your dad?
No, I don't think so.
You were yourself running your own company?
I was myself, yeah.
How old were you when you knew you were going to start a company?
I think I always wanted to start my own company. I mean, there's like those things you could sell as a kid. Like, I don't remember if you guys remember, like in the back of magazines, they would have, I don't remember what magazines, but they would have like these products, and you basically, you signed up, got like the welcome kit, and then you went around to like your parents' coworkers or whatever, and you sold them like just like this junk. I don't even remember what it was. Yeah, just like stuff like that. And so it wasn't like affiliated with the school. It was just like something I sent away for, and then so I went around and tried to make some money doing that. And I did like the lemonade stand and paper route and all that. But it wasn't until I was in probably 10th grade, when I was maybe 15 or 16, that I started a computer consulting company.
When you were selling the candies, how old were you when you started, or when you were selling the things out of the magazines?
Oh, probably like 8.
Yeah? Were you profitable?
No, I doubt it. I don't know. I didn't know anything about accounting. So.
Well, you didn't have a credit card, so
No, yeah.
you couldn't have been too bad.
No. Yeah, I doubt I took a big loss, but.
Did you learn? Did you carry any of those lessons forward from when you were 8 to now?
I don't know about 8, but certainly like 15, 16, doing my first computer consulting company, I definitely learned some lessons early on from that I think sometimes they're hard lessons that some people maybe don't learn in business, or maybe they learn it but later. And so I think learning it earlier on, when the stakes were much lower, was really beneficial. I mean, a really good example was, I remember I had a client. I grew up in Dearborn, so there was this guy in Northville that hired us to fix his old, like, I don't even think it was a 286, like it was like an 8088, or it was some IBM XT or some old computer. I had no idea what this thing was or how to fix it. And so like we took it all apart, and we're like, all right, we'll come back. And then we didn't know what to do, so we just kind of ignored the guy and didn't really call him back. And I remember like for weeks he kept calling me. I was like, in each day that went by, it was even harder to pick up the phone, because I was like, well, now it's been 2 weeks, and he's probably even madder at me. So finally, like I picked up the phone, I talked to him, and I went out, and I was really scared. I ended up finishing the job, and the guy tipped me at the end of the day. So like I turned that relationship into a really good lesson and a tip, probably $15 or something. But learning that lesson in business really has served me well through a number of companies, and certainly the last one or most recent one. Having like that focus on customer service in the web development field was really valuable.
What was the lesson you learned?
Oh, don't ignore your customers. I mean, especially if something goes wrong or there's a problem, like you need to address it as directly and quickly as possible. Don't just pretend it's not there and be in denial.
So did you have any notoriety as a young entrepreneur?
Yeah, so the computer consulting business, we ended up with a front page article on the Tuesday Detroit Free Press. And so it was like, we were the main story. It's like young kids do good in business. And this is a simpler time back in the 90s. But we got enough calls from that one article to like fill up our summer to fix people's computers doing computer consulting jobs. So yeah, the Detroit Free Press article, and then later it was picked up by Routers, and then CNN came in and interviewed us. So we were on the national CNN broadcast, which was pretty cool.
How did that feel?
Oh, it was awesome. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it's fun to have your cousin in Minnesota call you up and say, hey, I just saw you on CNN. What's going on?
Did you feel like you'd made it and you're about to hang it up and retire right then?
No, not at all. No, I mean, the plan was, all right, this is great, but I want to go to college to get an engineering degree.
And why was that?
Because I wanted to learn more about, I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to learn how to program, and it was this big like magical thing in my mind, and I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I figured college would be a good way to learn about that.
And why'd you want to learn engineering?
Well, specifically computer engineering, and at the time it's probably a toss-up between computer engineering and computer science, and depending on the school, like sometimes they're the same thing. So I wasn't sure exactly which of those I wanted, but I know I definitely wanted to understand how computers worked and how to program them. And I had an interest in hardware too, like the idea of creating printed circuit boards and stuff, or circuits, really interested me.
So what, you just wanted to learn for fun, or did you have a goal in mind where I'm going to learn this so then I can go and do something in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it probably half of it was fun. The other half was, well, I want to like earn money. I mean, I want to be able to support myself and do things. So.
And then when you graduated college, you went back and started your own company?
Man, what did I do? So I formed a company. Actually, so after I graduated from high school, a group of friends and me, we started just having weekly meetings, trying to figure out how we could do something. So I graduated high school in 1999, right? So we're at peak.com, bubble, everyone's doing great things, broadcast.com selling for billions, and all this stuff's going on. And so we're like, we should be out there doing something. Like we're smart enough at least, like maybe not the smartest, but the group of us were like, yeah, we should be able to do something. We didn't know what we wanted to do, but we just started having weekly meetings where we kind of have these brainstorming sessions about, all right, what are things that we're looking at that are interesting? What are things that we know about? What are things that we can do? And where does that kind of all intersect? And so we started doing these weekly meetings, and we ended up finding different opportunities or different problems people were trying to solve, just kind of through our own personal networks. And so we actually got acquainted with a Detroit rock promoter that wanted to stream video from his clubs, so people could like watch concerts at home. And again, this is late 90s, maybe 2000, 2001, and bandwidth wasn't that great, and streaming video wasn't that great on the internet. It was still a pretty new thing. So we met up with this guy, and we ended up walking out of this like meeting at Starbucks with with $30,000 of angel funding. We didn't know we were going to get in. We didn't know we were going to this coffee shop to meet with someone to have them offer us money as an investor. And so we walked out with 30 grand, which was a huge sum of money. We couldn't even imagine what to do with that. And so we set up an office space in Plymouth, and we bought computers and software licenses and compiler licenses, and we just started kind of trying to figure out things we could do to help this rock promoter, and we did some stuff with Ticketmaster and emusic.com and stuff like that. So we learned a lot about like getting an office space and computers and being a real company. Of course, being a real company is not about just getting office space or computers, and so we didn't make any money. We felt very indebted to the investors, so probably 4 years later, we're all kind of starting to graduate from college, and we're like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be messing around with this other startup anymore. So yeah, that was kind of like the next thing I did during college. I worked, and I went to school, and then we did this startup on the side.
So you guys walked into a meeting, didn't know you were going to be in a meeting, and somehow came away having done a deal for cash for equity?
Oh yeah, we were 8 equal partners. And those of you who have had partners might know what an issue that might be.
I've seen it at smaller scale. What, never with 8.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, how did tell us?
Yeah, it didn't really work out too well. But what is cool is we did all come out of that experience. We went in as friends, and we came out as friends too. So it really wasn't that ugly. Then again, we didn't really make any money, so that's probably why it wasn't that ugly.
How many people in the audience want to start a company? Maybe about half or a third. How many people want to do it by themselves?
1.5.
How many people want to just have one partner? How many want to have more than 2 or more? Alex, what kind of advice do you have for people in the audience when they're forming these partnerships?
Joining up with the wrong partners is the worst thing you can do. You can waste a lot of time. I think partners can be very valuable, especially when they're complementary, right? So maybe, like a typical setup is you've got maybe a dreamer or a visionary, right? They're like an idea guy, not necessarily I use the term idea guy with a negative connotation sometimes. In this case, I don't mean in a negative way. I mean, if you're just focused on today and the current and the present, and you're not dreaming a little bit, it's kind of hard to come up with a great idea for your business. But you also need that operations person or pragmatist or just person that's going to make sure that the details are kept in check and things get done and move forward. And so sometimes you can have partners where they have very different focuses in the business, and that's just, that's just a 2-person example. But I think having partners can be great for a business. I know that later in life, as I grew my latest business, and I looked at what certain competitors were doing, and they all were partners that didn't fit. Most of them were partners where they didn't fit very well together, and it annoyed their employees, and it held them back, and it confused their clients, and so it can be an asset sometimes to be on your own too.
How do you find out if you're going to be a good fit with somebody before you start the partnership?
I don't know if I have the best answer to that, being that I haven't created a successful business with partners. But I think I would look at, do you have shared values with them? And it's not that you can't have differing views, like in current events or whatever, but I mean values in the way do we care about customer service? Do we care about pushing the envelope and boundaries, or are we very conservative and just want to work with tried and true technology? If you don't share those common values with your partner, you're going to kind of be at a tug of war. So I'd say shared values is really important. Being fiscally responsible. I mean, there's lots of stories of partners out there embezzling money or, screwing over investors. You got to make sure that you really trust who you're going into business with. And if someone's bad with money, that's an awful partner to have in the business.
What are the pros and cons of being a single founder?
One of the pros, I think, is you can make a decision, just do it. Right or wrong. Sometimes making the decision is the hardest part, and whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter. It's just delaying that decision can be very destructive to what you're trying to achieve in the business. And so I think when you're a sole founder, you can move a little faster and make those decisions. And even if they're wrong, then you can change it up and go make hopefully the right decision. So that's a definite pro. One of the cons is, at the end of the day, when you're worried about payroll or what should I do, you don't necessarily have anyone else that understands the context the same way as you. If you have employees, they won't necessarily have the same view. If you have a spouse, like they may support you, but they don't necessarily have the same context or experience that you do. And so in some ways, it can be a very lonely thing.
When you talked about delaying the decision being more destructive than making the wrong decision, can you give an example of that?
I'd say sometimes like having a good idea is really important. Being an engineer, I think the execution is more important. But I mean, if you execute on a shitty idea, an idea is important too. I forgot where I was going with it. What was the question again?
An example of no decision, delaying a decision being worse than the wrong decision.
Right. Yeah. So timing and luck, I think, are a component as well. So if you decide, well, I want to go start a company and I want to do the next mobile app for whatever, and say this was like 5 years ago, if you take 2 years to figure out what type of mobile app company you want to make, everyone else already made a mobile app company, right? And so it's either a commodity or it's a cliche or it's just not that interesting anymore. And you missed your timing because you didn't decide. So it would have been better to make the wrong decision, go make an app, learn a lot from the market, from employees, clients, partners, whoever. With that wrong decision, you come out of it smarter, even if you burn cash. And then 6 months later, you're making the right decision instead of being out of luck 2 years later.
Yeah, I think that's a great illustration. So then you graduated college, winding back a little bit, and then what happened?
So at U of M, I went to U of M Dearborn for computer engineering, and that degree ends with a 2-semester long project where it's a senior design project. And so for me, my group, we decided to do a robot, and it was like a car underbody inspection robot. The idea being, if you're at the borders, customs will use like mirrors or whatever, or dogs. And so this was like a little robot that could, go into a car with a camera, and it had a camera on it where it could compare images of the underbody of the car with images from the OEM, like Ford or Chrysler or whatever, and look for differences, and then highlight those differences on a screen. And so it was a really fun project. I was able to apply everything I learned in school. And so we presented the final day of class at the senior design competition. We didn't win the competition. We didn't even come in third place. But afterward, I had a gentleman approach me and said, "I want to buy your robot." And I was like, "Well, that's cool, but why?" It's cool to me, but it's not production ready. You're not going to go deploy this thing at the border or anything. And so it turned out that he was on his way to a Homeland Security show in Washington, D.C., where people were looking for stuff like that, and he didn't need a final product to sell, but he needed kind of something to market his company and generate some interest, and hopefully generating some sales from some sort of federal government or public organization. And so I formed a business with 2 of my professors and a fellow student that graduated that year. And so I had a robotics company. And I guess without going into too much detail, professors don't always know a lot about business. They might know a lot about engineering or their subject. They don't always know everything about business. And so I decided to move on from that company after a few months.
And then how'd you get to commercial progression?
So I was living out here for a while. I worked as an engineer. I had a couple jobs. I worked as an engineer in Troy, and then I worked as an engineer out here in Holt. And then I got the opportunity to go work for a startup out of Salt Lake City called Move Networks. Move Networks was working with ABC and NBC to do some of the first HD quality video streaming on the internet. And so my first client was NBC and ESPN. And I was watching ESPN streaming the other night. I was like, that started 10 years ago when we did March Madness, 10 games at once in HD resolution with ESPN. And so that was a really cool job. And it was a startup that had venture funding to the tune of $80 million. And then October 2008 hit, and Mark, we all remember that. So the first round of layoffs came.
Actually, some people might not remember that.
Yeah, well, it was tough. Markets crashed and people lost their jobs. So I was one of those people right in the middle of the recession in February 2009 that found myself with a lot more time on my hands. And so I was a sales engineer for Move Networks. And what that involved was a lot of flying around. Like I think I did maybe 50 or 60,000 miles up in the air my year with Move Networks. And so I had a lot of time away from home in hotel rooms and on planes and stuff like that. So I had created a LLC just to like do some side consulting work. And I didn't really, didn't have any. I just like, I want to do some work. Like I want to be productive when I'm on the road, not doing my day job. And so I formed this LLC so that when I figured out what I want to do, again, kind of like the company back when I was out of high school, just like I got myself in a position where I was available to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I had this LLC going. I didn't really do anything, but then I got laid off. So I said, well, I don't have a job. Like I don't have a wife. I don't have a kid. I don't have a house. I don't have a mortgage. And now I don't have a job. So now's the perfect time to see if I can make it on my own. And I'm like, I did two things. I just started setting up meetings with people I knew that could do good work and people I knew that might have problems that needed to be solved. And so within 3 weeks, I had enough conversations where I actually closed my first 3 projects. And I had 4 or 5 contractors working with me on those projects. And so I was off and running. I had a consulting business, and I just happened to have picked a random name and called it Commercial Progression when I filed the paperwork. And so I kept running with that name because I didn't have time to figure out how to change it.
I feel like you just glazed over something that I think people struggle with for years sometimes. You said that in 3 weeks you got 3 clients and 5 hires, 5 contractors. Can you dive in more and explain how some people find that so hard and that you got that done in 3 weeks?
So oddly enough, so when I lived out here in East Lansing, I knew no one out here. Like, I was just all alone. I would go to work, I'd code all day alone, I'd come home, and I didn't know anyone. And I'm like, I gotta figure out how to meet people. So I got on this like kick of just networking. Like, well, I met that guy over there, I met Chuck, I met you. I probably met 1 or 2 other people in here. And so I guess probably a couple years leading up to that, I started networking with people and just like kind of building my personal network, whether it was just for no reason or they seemed like nice people, or maybe it was someone that I thought I could work with one day. Just like genuinely being interested in people and meeting people, not really for any specific end or means, just because I was interested in meeting people. And I think over time, doing that both in my personal and professional lives and kind of building that network meant when I wanted to set up those meetings, like I just thought about, well, who are people I know that are smart, and who are people that I know that are maybe doing cool things and maybe they need some help. Maybe they don't, and it's all right. We had a good lunch or coffee or beer or whatever. So yeah, I guess maybe kind of getting into meetups and going to like Grand River Connection out here and just kind of like networking. Definitely was a major asset to have under my belt when I found myself without a job.
So I feel like with the networking, one piece of it is the talent, and so there's finding smart people. The other piece of it is people with problems. There's probably a little bit more to that when you're looking for potential clients that you're setting up these coffees with. I mean, everybody's got problems.
Yeah. Well, so my first few projects, one was it was an application for video streaming. Another one was a digital marketing plan for a small local author that had a book. And one was a small website for like a one-person insurance company. And so it was like all over the board. Like I didn't have a specific niche. I called myself a technology consultant. And so it was very, very broad. But it was just like, yeah, hey, this person needs a website. This person, is like I work with them. They need to do some digital marketing. And this other person like knew a guy that knew another guy. And they're like, I want to work on this project. Can you help? Kind of thing. So.
Okay, so you get those clients, and you got this team of 5, and then one of the challenges people can run into is if you've got these employees but you can't pay them, you got to have like the next thing.
Yeah, so they weren't employees. They were independent contractors. So they were specific for those projects, and yeah, contractors in the truest sense.
So how did that work then? You've got these projects rolling. You've got employees. Maybe you're doing sales, project management, the whole slew of things. How are you thinking about how you allocate your time at that point?
Well, at that time, so yeah, again, this is like February 2009. Just got laid off. I had saved up a little bit of money, so I had some cushion. I mean, it wasn't a ton of money, but it was definitely, I had low expenses, so I felt comfortable kind of taking the risk. And the overhead was low. I mean, I worked out of my apartment, in coffee shops. I didn't have payroll. Yeah, I mean, there were no expenses. You know, it was just like, how can I figure out a way to generate enough money where I'm covering my bills?
How did you allocate your time?
I just spent all my time trying to figure that out. I mean,
Trying to figure out what?
how to make money, how to sell. I never thought I'd be a sales guy, so I had to figure out a little bit, you know, how to sell. And I bought a book called Technical Sales when I got the sales engineering job. And I bought another book called $1 Million Consulting by a guy named Alan Weiss. And so yeah, I read those 2 books.
What's the most important piece of advice that you have for somebody who's at that stage in their company when they're just starting and they're either pre-revenue or they just signed their first deal?
Well, I think what I learned in my first year of doing that, like I had a couple projects, but I mean they weren't giant projects. I mean they weren't enough to cover like my annual nut or salary or whatever. And so what I learned in the first kind of 9 or 12 months was that the issue with being a technology consultant was that no one knew what that meant, or it meant different things to different people. And if people don't understand what you do or what you're selling, it's impossible for them to refer business to you. Like, you really won't, like, I lucked out with those first 3 jobs because it just happened to be like they were kind of close in my network and they weren't giant projects, and it was something where I could be effective pretty quickly with some help from other people. But to create a viable business where you're building a sales funnel and continually closing new business, I realized that I had to focus on some sort of niche where, in like 2 or 3 words, people could, like I could say, this is what I do, and people are like, oh, okay, I get it. He's the guy for that, And so when they're talking to someone else the next day, it's like, oh yeah, I know a guy that does that, or if they say that keyword. So in my case, the focus was Drupal. And so what ended up happening was that anywhere between like Grand Rapids and Detroit, even up to like Traverse City, like if you said like Drupal, eventually like my name would get associated with that. And obviously not everyone, like there were competing companies, but it got out there enough to where, if someone's having coffee or a conversation with someone, they're like, oh, I've got this Drupal problem. Like, oh, you should talk to Alex Fisher. And so I started getting referral business once I was brave enough to stick my, stick out there that says, this is what I do. And even more importantly, these are things I don't do, and I'm going to turn the work down. And when you're trying to figure out how to, feed yourself, turning work down is the last thing you're thinking of, but it's absolutely what you've got to be prepared to do, because if you take on the jobs that aren't in that niche, you don't have time to actually do the niche and develop that niche and develop the reputation in it. So you absolutely have to find a niche, and it can't require a paragraph or 90 minutes to describe to someone. Like, they should understand, in 2 or 3 words, what do I associate, you with your, you and your niche, or what's your brand?
You used the word there, brave. You said it was like brave to stick a stake in the ground and say, I do this and not these things.
Yeah, so 2008, I think everywhere from like late 90s on, it seemed like everyone I went to high school with all moved out to Silicon Valley or moved out of the state. So people like moving out of the state, and so everyone's moving out. Everyone wanted, automotive was, Michigan was all about automotive, so I wasn't doing anything automotive related. I decided I'm going to stay in Michigan because I can be a bigger fish in a smaller pond quicker than like if I was in New York or even like Chicago. Like there were already plenty of people that did Drupal there. In my case, Drupal. And so like, yeah, Detroit, there's no one here that's like the Drupal expert. So I'm like, all right, those are my 2 words, Drupal expert. And it's not that I even like knew everything about Drupal. I mean, I still had plenty more I had to learn. But I knew enough to know that I had a combination of capabilities and the capacity to learn, and improve those capabilities. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to be the Drupal person. I want to be the person you think of when you need Drupal help.
For you in the audience, how many of you have too many ideas and you're not sure which one to pick for the business you want to start? Nobody has that problem? Okay, we got 1, we got 2, we got 3 people.
Who needs an idea?
Yeah, and then on the flip, how many people out there need an idea? So there's like 7 respondents to the whole thing. Alex, how should people pick what they do? How do they pick what to say yes to and what to say no to everything else?
You've got to be passionate about it. If like mobile apps are good. It seemed like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, everyone was doing a mobile app company. And I'm like, not all these people can be that passionate about mobile apps. It's like, it's popular right now, there's a lot of buzz, it's the new thing. But, so number one, if everyone else is doing it, like run the other direction. Like, if everyone's doing a mobile app startup or a blockchain startup or whatever, run the other way. So make sure not everyone's doing that idea, and then the second part is you got to be really passionate about it. And like I get, like passion develops over time. So maybe, maybe you're not losing sleep over that idea or that passion just yet, but like you're going to encounter so many issues and struggles and difficulties in starting up and then growing your business that if you aren't really passionate about it, it's going to be very difficult to kind of make it through those humps. And I would probably add, if you lose the passion for it, you should probably change that idea up too.
So if you start a company and you're not passionate about it, it's just going to be kind of difficult?
It's going to be really difficult.
What's it going to be? Is it going to be hell?
Probably.
What's some of the worst, the most stressful times you've had as an entrepreneur?
I hired my first 2 employees, and then about 3 months later, I had less than $5,000 in the company checking account, and it cost a lot more than $5,000 to pay 2 employees. So, yeah, I mean, I was like 1 payroll away from going out of business, and I had just hired my first 2 employees. Like, I had already been in business for about 2.5 or 3 years, so I had a reputation, I had a portfolio, I did have some money in the bank, but yeah, I hired them, and we didn't have a ton of clients. We did have a big project we were working on, and they were net 45, and the checks didn't start rolling in yet, so it got close. So yeah, I mean, that would be one example, certainly early on when I was still in the startup phase.
What did that feel like?
It's just stressful. I mean, when you hire employees, at least for me, like, it wasn't an easy decision. Like, I didn't just go out, figure out what I was doing, and hire employees right away. Like, I was a one-man shop. I wore all the hats. And then once I kind of had some traction and momentum and some money in the bank, I was like, all right, and I think I found the right person or 2 to come on board. I'm just gonna make the jump and do it. And it's never an easy jump, I don't think, but I was bootstrapped, so I didn't have a ton of venture capital, and I had to be very wise about where I spent my dollars. I didn't even have an office at that point. I actually was like sharing half a room at a company in Farmington Hills. But you know what? I had a conference room I could use. I had a business address I could use, and I had a table with 5 chairs, so I could grow to 5. I knew that.
How bad did the stress get? Were you having trouble sleeping, trouble eating? Were you feeling like a failure?
Yeah, so I mean, I ran CP for about 8 years, and yeah, it got to the point where, yeah, couldn't sleep, was stressed out, was burnt out. I learned what burnout really is, and yeah, it's an awful, awful feeling.
Did that make it harder to be productive at work?
Yeah.
It sounds like you were in like a nosedive situation. How did you get out of that?
So I grew the team to about 12 people. I mean, it fluctuated a little bit between, like, we had like summer interns and I was focused on full-time employees because I wanted them to be dedicated to me. So I tried to, I wanted to dedicate myself to them. I didn't want to just kind of bring them as like temporary contractors. So yeah, it's like in professional services company, like you basically have to add headcount to generate more revenue. And so when you add headcount, you get more expenses. And when you don't have a big pile of money or investors or partners to fall back on, the stakes, essentially as you grow, the stakes get higher and higher. So, like $10,000 seems like a lot of money when you're first starting out, and then, when you're burning through a lot more than $10,000 a month just to keep the doors open, then $100,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money. And so, you pay your taxes, you pay your employees, and in the day, if you're lucky, you have something left over for yourself. And hopefully you're also saving to build that war chest for, if you have a bad month or a bad quarter. And yeah, so you could spend years, say you saved up $100,000, you got that in your account, but you're blowing through $75,000 a month. Like that just takes, one bad month, and then you're, close to closing your doors, and then, one other bad thing goes on, and, you're out. And, he who runs out of money loses in business. So you can't run out of money. That's the goal.
How do you recommend people in the audience deal with that stress if they hit it?
One of the surprising things to me is I didn't realize how stressed I was for years. And I think it snuck up on me. And so I guess I would just say you got to watch out for the warning signs. Things like losing sleep, drinking too much, just being really crabby or shitty.
We're getting real here.
What?
We're getting real here.
That's legitimate. And yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy starting up. And then once you start making money and then growing, that's a whole new thing. You realize one day you're not even a startup, because we're all focused on being starting up, and that's the easy part. Once you start up, now you got to grow, and that's way harder than even starting up. I was always focused on starting up, but when I realized I was post startup or second stage or whatever you call it, it's just even harder.
But did you decide to do it again after you sold your company?
Nope. Nope, I didn't. I might, but I don't have any specific plans right now to build another business.
Aren't you doing a blockchain consultancy right now?
I am a blockchain consultant right now.
Oh, okay. What's the difference here?
Someone approached me they needed some help, and so I'm giving them help. They just happen to be a really large investment bank that moves a lot of money around and securities around every day. So it's a very interesting problem to work on. So I'm doing it purely because, and we haven't talked about blockchain tonight, but I'm very passionate about blockchain and cryptocurrency and what it enables. And so I'm at the position now where I'm not worried about building a business in it. I'm just interested in finding a group of people to work on interesting problems, and that where blockchain may be a solution to those problems. And the fun part about that is when I'm not trying to, again, when I don't have an agenda, really make that startup or make that next sale, when I'm just kind of having fun with it, I think the passion shows out and excites other people. And so I get people coming to me. I had 2 people in the last week approach me about becoming business partners in a blockchain startup. And it's that's really cool. I really take that as a compliment. And I don't know, I may do something with one of those groups, but in the meantime, I had an interesting opportunity come my way. They said, we just worked with IBM on a proof of concept based off of blockchain. We want to take it to the next phase. We need a blockchain expert to help us. Would you consult with us? And I'm like, that's perfect. I've been consulting since I was 16. I've been doing that for 20 years. I would love to do that. It sounds like an interesting project. So I happen to be doing a consulting gig right now. But I'm not out there trying to build a sales pipeline or a team or anything like that. It just happens that I am interested again in meeting interesting people, and it turns out I'm meeting really good people that know things about coding smart contracts or understand how blockchains work. At the same time, I'm encountering people that have problems, and it's I'm having deja vu here. It's yeah, there's lots of opportunity out there, and so yeah, I'm probably going to end up doing something at some point, but I'm not focused on doing a solo founder thing again. Like I did that, there were pros and cons. What I really want to do is work with a great group of people. So if that means there's some startup out there that needs me to join their team and they're already going, cool, like that might be the thing for me. If I find people and they're like, hey, this is a great idea, let's form a company and do something together, yeah, I might be down for that. But I'm really focused on making sure it's the right people and the right idea, as opposed to, like one of my other businesses where it's like, all right, get the money, get the office, like get all that like logistical stuff in place. That's actually really boring, I think. Even though sometimes it's made up, like having a cool office is cool or whatever, or being pre-revenue or getting venture capital. Like none of that matters. Like it's all about what you're actually doing with those tools. So like the people and the ideas where they come together, I'm really interested in that. And so I'm just seeing where it takes me.
Seems like you have a lot of cool things happening. You're at a coffee shop, and then all of a sudden you come out of there with a check, and you lose in a competition, but somebody buys your software, and now you're doing this, and people are approaching you. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs, they have the opposite experience where they're out there, hitting the pavement, and they get a whole ton of no's. What do you attribute?
Yeah, it's just
that too.
It's just it's the wrong impression. The fact is, I have to work my butt off for that stuff. I was interested in Ethereum, which is a blockchain technology. And so I was working from a coffee shop, even though at that point I had an office and I had a staff. I got out of the office just to like focus. And the cool thing about getting out of the office sometimes is just like getting yourself out of the norm where you can dream a little bit more. And as an engineer, sometimes I have trouble dreaming. Like I'm really pragmatic and focused on execution. I'm probably more that kind of operations type person, but if I can get out of that and I can get up into the blue sky a little bit and dream, I can kind of, I realized I was like, wow, this Ethereum is really cool. I don't know anyone else doing anything with this, so I'm like, let's start a meetup group. And so I'm like, I didn't just put a task on my list. I'm like, no, I'm going to start it up right now. I went to meetup.com. I'm like, all right, I'm going to make the Michigan Ethereum meetup group. I'm the only person in it. And now there's, like 100 people locally in it. And I've made so many great connections to where last week we started up a Slack and I invited 10 people. And now today there's like 27 or 28 people. I think I invited you, right?
I don't think he invited me.
I didn't invite you yet? I'm going to invite you.
So I was just thinking in my head, I'm like, 10 people got an invite. I didn't get my invite.
Well, the thing was, I invited 10 people, but they've already invited other people. So now the size of the groups, increased by 150%. So, yeah, like, luck, I think, plays a role. But yeah, you've got to do the legwork and you've got to hustle. But just because you're hustling doesn't mean you can't have fun. And so to me, starting up a meetup group is something I've done before. And so it was something where I didn't even have to type in a credit card number because I already had an account. So I just created the group, and I just set up a meeting. And it was like I learned years ago with the first Drupal meetup, like if one person shows up, I can have an interesting conversation and hopefully share something with them, like the give and take over there. Like I can give them something, I can take an idea from them, and who knows what happens. And so I've met some great people through the Ethereum group. And so, yeah, just like I think, stuff doesn't just happen. You've got to be out there, like, kind of tilling the field, or, if you want.
You're putting yourself out there, and then these things seem like they are easy, but they don't know everything that went on to get you there. Yeah,
and I think, like, being passionate about an idea and sharing that, like, it's contagious. So, I mean, I created the Slack for Ethereum because I had 5 people like text me between like my phone and Facebook and Twitter. Like I had 5 people the other morning last week, and it wasn't even like 10 a.m. yet. And like at one point it like woke my wife up because my phone was vibrating or something. And it's like, I gotta just like find a central place. But it's like people were kind of drawn to talking to me about it because they kind of caught the bug. They were passionate about it, and they want to, when you're passionate about an idea, you want to, talk through it and build stuff with it. And so, I don't know. It's just like kind of making yourself available for those things to happen to you, I think is part of it.
Very cool. We're going to take audience questions in 2 minutes. So if people want to line up over here, you can ask Alex questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And Alex, while people line up over there, we glazed over it, but what advice do you have for the audience when they go to sell their business?
So I guess a little bit of detail. So I ran commercial progression for about 8 years. When I was about 4 years in, I got a message from some guy on LinkedIn saying, hey, I'm interested in talking about Drupal with you. I'll fly you out to DC if you come talk to me about it. I'm like, oh, this sounds weird. Let's see what happens. And so literally like 3 days later, I was in DC. I met with this guy, and it was kind of under the pretense of they wanted to work together. And then the next morning, I had breakfast with them. They gave me this letter of intent to buy the company from me. I was like I wasn't generating. I was generating maybe $120,000 a year in revenue, which is like that's nothing for a company. I'm like, who the hell would want to buy my company? And what would they actually give me for it? Without going into too much detail, at the 11th hour, I decided that was not the right choice for me. I didn't feel good about the deal as it kind of was coming together. So I walked away. But what I learned about that process is that, number one, something called due diligence, that's a pretty stressful thing. Like having someone look through all your QuickBooks and all your code and your clients, and just like that whole due diligence process is tough. And if you don't have your stuff in order, mine was in pretty good order, but it wasn't perfect. If you don't have kind of like your ducks in the road, that can be an even worse process to go through. And so what I learned is that if I wanted to one day sell the company, I was going to have to make sure I had just done certain things. And it's different for every business, but for me, for example, like for a professional services firm, if you don't have any recurring revenue, and as a sole founder, like everything has to go through you, that's not a very attractive business for a buyer, because if you go away, like what are they buying? And so depending on your business and maybe what the sticking points are, sometimes to sell your business, if you need 2 or 3 years to really prepare it and kind of strategically put it where it needs to be so that it's more attractive to a buyer. And so, so being 4 years in, kind of learning a lot about maybe what I didn't want or what buyers wanted, and kind of where those things were mismatched, I was able to take my business in the right direction so that when it was time to sell it to the right group, I had things like recurring revenue, I had a leadership team, everything wasn't running through me. I mean, if I didn't show up to the office or if I took a vacation, like the company still ran, things got done. And that's a lot easier business to sell than some of the alternatives.
Thank you. So I think, Phil, you got a question? I think there's a mic over there.
I'll ask. Wait. Okay. Lou.
Okay.
There we go. Okay. One thing in the crypto space that really excites me is the success of ICOs recently. And I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit. Like, one, what is an ICO for people who in the room aren't familiar? And two, if I'm a startup or a company that wants to raise money through that, like what are the steps I would go through to start that process, and when does it make sense?
All right, so an ICO is an initial coin offering, not to be confused with an IPO, which is an initial public offering. And if that sounds confusing, it's because it kind of is, and there could be very big issues with the SEC because of that. So I would just kind of preface everything else I say about ICOs or cryptocurrency, like buyer beware. There are a lot of scammers out there. It's like the 1980s and penny stocks. If any of you saw like Wolf of Wall Street, like that is the world of cryptocurrency and ICOs right now. So be very, very careful if you're going to play around in that. That being said, ICOs are a very interesting way to raise money through cryptocurrency. Just a few days ago, there was an organization that raised $150 million worth of Ether, which is a cryptocurrency that powers the Ethereum blockchain. They raised $150 million in like under 3 hours, and that's without venture capitalists or bankers or regulators or, I mean, hopefully some lawyers, but there's fewer people with their hands in your pocket, and they raised $150 million in 3 hours. And a few weeks ago, there's another company that raised $23 million in 15 minutes. And so that's a very interesting way to fund your startup that didn't exist more than a few years ago, and has really taken off with Ethereum, since it's a Turing-complete blockchain that makes it very easy to create programmable money and contracts and stuff like that. I don't know if that kind of...
So let's say I want to raise money through that. Like, who do I talk to?
I know a guy. I know a couple guys. I would say there's a lot of, there's not very much clarity from the SEC and regulators as to how you can raise money through an ICO, but there are people doing it in the US, and reportedly there's at least one or two groups I know of doing it here in Michigan. I spoke with a lawyer based in Nashville just a few weeks ago, and he's got 3 clients in the US, and they're working on the legal side of those ICOs right now. So it's an interesting way to fund your startup. There are some very particular things you need to navigate to do that right, and there's a company called, who was it? I think it was Coinbase. They created an article kind of talking through if you're going to do an initial coin offering, which is like offering a token or cryptocurrency in return for people giving you money to not specifically invest in your company, right? There's some small syntactical things that you have to be careful about. So the way in which you run an ICO in the US, you got to be really careful about how you do that right now. And the way some people do it is they form nonprofits in Switzerland. So yeah, it doesn't, just because there's a lot of scammers and shady things doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate way to raise money. It's actually a very efficient, effective way to raise money. The issue is that because it's so new, there's not regulation to really kind of guide you with what's the right way and wrong way to do that. And so, depending on your appetite for risk, that could be good or it could be bad.
Okay. Turn it over to Kevin.
So my question, I guess, just rewinding back a little bit, so what made you kind of get into the whole cryptocurrency blockchain area, and how would you say it's going to enable certain fields in the future?
Yeah, so in 2013, I remember looking at Tesla stock was $30 and Bitcoin was $30, and I had read about both of those for just here and there, for a year or two previous to 2013. And then, I was like, oh, this is cool. And I tried to play around with Bitcoin. And so I thought I could mine Bitcoin by downloading this thing called a wallet. And so I downloaded the whole Bitcoin blockchain, which at that time was 5 or 6 gigs. And so I spent all afternoon downloading that. And after I did that, I found out I couldn't actually mine with it. It was just a way to hold Bitcoins, of which I had none of. And so I was like, okay, this is kind of cool, but my time's probably better spent focusing on growing my business and running my business. So I just kind of set it aside until I saw that it hit like $800 or $900. And it's like, oh, this is cool. I'm going to try to figure out how to buy one of these. And so I bought high, and then it's like, oh, then it fell down to, 700 and 600 and 500. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll sell those for a loss. And so I bought high, sold low, and that was my entry into the world of cryptocurrency. And so I was like, all right, I feel like I missed the train on this one. And I know it's not good, I need to get in before people drive it up. So Bitcoin's not it for me, but I'm gonna keep my eyes open for the next technology. And so then I heard about something called Ethereum that was announced at, I think, the 2014 Miami Bitcoin conference. You were probably there, weren't you?
I wasn't at that one.
You weren't at that one?
I was hanging out with Metallic in Chicago.
Nice. So in 2014, I heard about Ethereum, and then 2015, I heard Ethereum was actually they raised a bunch of money, and they were actually coming out with a project was getting close to launch. And so then I just started diving into Ethereum hardcore, and I got really excited about that before it launched July 31st, 2015.
So, how do you see it, the cryptocurrency in general, how do you see it enabling certain industries in the future?
So cryptocurrency is really interesting stuff, and so Bitcoin was really kind of the first viable cryptocurrency. And in order to have a viable cryptocurrency, you need a way where people can't copy those coins or that digital representation of money. And the issue is that data by design is really, really easy to copy. Like that's the whole point, is like data is easy to move around and copy. And so when you have something like money where you don't want people to copy it, it was a very, very difficult problem that people have spent a long time trying to figure out. And so it wasn't until the idea of Bitcoin was announced, it was October 31st, 2008. And it was the invention of this thing called a blockchain, which enabled you to essentially kind of create coins or currency that people couldn't copy. And so cryptocurrency was kind of like the first use case of blockchains. And you need, they go hand in hand. You can't have a blockchain function very well today if you don't have a cryptocurrency component to it. Because for the Bitcoin blockchain to work, you need miners to process transactions and create blocks. And without going into the deep technical details of how that works, the miners have to be incentivized to do their mining. And so they're rewarded through this cryptocurrency. And so cryptocurrency, blockchain, it essentially enables transactions between different people that may not know or trust each other. And when you can move assets or money and things between two people without having to trust a third party to vouch for those people, whether it's a bank or a government, or a good friend or an escrow agent, all of a sudden, all the giant businesses in the world that are based off of being that trusted third party are not necessarily as valuable or needed in the same way. And so we're talking like banks are huge. Money goes back. I mean, I did open source software. Look at what open source software did to technology. Bitcoin open sourced money and finance. One of the oldest institutions, in human history. So now with blockchains, we can conduct business peer-to-peer without having someone in the middle to take their cut. And so blockchain is going to disrupt everything from finance to healthcare to supply chains to accounting to just everything. Now it's not the answer. It's not going to solve all your problems. I'm not an anarchist. If any of you are crypto anarchists, I apologize. I don't think the government's going away. I don't think the U.S. dollar is going to plunge to zero tomorrow. I could be right. I could be wrong. But what it does mean is if you're taking your cut as a third-party intermediary and you are not providing good value, you're going to go the way of the dinosaurs. And that's huge because these large companies don't understand blockchain that well, and they don't necessarily understand how they're exposed. It means startups can come in and fill those gaps and provide those niche services. So it's, I think, a very, very big opportunity, especially for startups.
Yep. Well, thanks, Alex. You shared so much with us. And the last question, what do you want to be remembered for?
Oh, yeah, so you warned me about this question. I guess I don't really spend a whole lot of time worrying about being remembered, and maybe that's just because we're kind of like the Twitter generation. It's what did you say in the last 10 seconds? But no, I guess I would just say I hope that I can provide some utility and value to this world while I'm here, and that's it.
How about, did Alex help you guys out tonight? Did he provide you some value tonight? Thank you, Alex. Thank you.